Well, folks, much ink has been spilled denouncing Donald Trump as a fascist and as a dictator over the last 8 years. Some of the time it's been liberals exaggerating and obfuscating facts to gain a political advantage. But sometimes they've had a point. This week, folks, Donald Trump crossed the line from threatening First Amendment rights to just out and out trampling them. Yes. It was in the case of Mr. Mahmoud Khalil, who is a recent Columbia University graduate and a Palestinian activist who is currently being detained by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement in a facility in Jena, Louisiana. Now, it's crazy that these in Jena, Louisiana. If you guys remember the Jena 6 from like 20 years ago, those young boys who were in a schoolyard fight after a bunch of racial incidents happened at their high school, and there were like nooses involved and all that. And they ended up beating up these white kids who were bullying them, and they ended up getting a bunch of time in prison, and a lot of people marched and protested down to Jena, Louisiana. Well, apparently a lot of injustice goes on in Jena, Louisiana, because that's where Mahmoud Khalil is right now. He was actually arrested on Saturday at his university-owned apartment in New York by federal immigration authorities. The Trump administration is seeking to deport him, claiming that his presence in the United States poses serious adverse foreign policy consequences, a determination made by Secretary of State Marco Rubio. This is what Marco Rubio had to say about the situation.
When you come to the United States as a visitor, which is what a visa is, which is how this individual entered this country, as on a visitor's visa, okay, you are here as a visitor. We can deny you that visa. We can deny you that if you tell us when you apply, hi, I'm trying to get into the United States on a student visa. I am a big supporter of Hamas, a murderous, barbaric group that kidnaps children, that rapes teenage girls, that takes hostages, that allows them to die in captivity, that returns more bodies than live hostages. If you tell us that you are in favor of a group like this, and if you tell us when you apply for your visa, and by the way, I intend to come to your country as a student and rile up all kinds of anti-Jewish student, anti-Semitic activities, I intend to shut down your universities. If you told us all these things when you applied for a visa, we would deny your visa. I hope we would. If you actually end up doing that, once you're in this country on such a visa, we will revoke it. And if you end up having a green card, not citizenship, but a green card as a result of that visa while you're here in those activities, we're going to kick you out. It's as simple as that. This is not about free speech. This is about people that don't have a right to be in the United States to begin with.
So that is Marco Rubio, our current Secretary of State, who's accusing Mahmoud Khalil of supporting Hamas. So what is the real uncut dope about this? Who is Mahmoud Khalil? Well, I will let him explain himself in his own words of who he is and what he is about.
I was born and raised in a Palestinian refugee camp in southern Damascus in Syria. My family's history in Palestine actually goes back to as long as my grandparent could trace it. They lived in a very small village right next to Tiberias. Mostly they were farmers. My grandmother, she used to tell us that she had Jewish neighbors. They would share a piece of land where they would farm it. Tiberias was one of the first cities that the Zionists targeted in 1948 with ethnic cleansing. In April 1948, a month before the Nakba, the Zionist militias, they burned one of their villages. When they heard the news about it, they had to leave immediately. Some of the men went to fight. Big families, they had to go to Syria. My grandmother, she was pregnant at that time. She had to walk 40 miles she gave birth on the way. When they arrived in the refugee camp, they thought it's just a matter of days until they would go back. They did not want to be killed because they heard about the horror stories across Tiberias. My dad was born in a tent. His family lived in that tent until like mid-70s, when they upgraded to small structures. In the 90s, they finally kind of like had concrete buildings. To us, it was always a temporary home until we go back to Palestine.
So that's him talking about his family's history. They were kicked out of Palestine during the Nakba, which means the catastrophe in Arabic, where millions of Palestinian people were either killed or forced off of their native land by the Zionists, who decided they were going to take their land. And a lot of people don't know this, but Israel was not always going to be where it is currently. The Zionists thought about putting it in Uganda, East Africa, Argentina. So this idea that, these people just always wanted this land and only this land, that's complete nonsense. Okay, that was something that was decided with the Balfour Declaration in 1917, where the British, after they came across that land after World War I, and they were in debt, and they essentially promised the Rothschilds, who helped finance the war, well, we just came across Palestine from the Ottoman Empire. Well, we'll just put Israel here. So that was 30 years before they even decided to, that there even was a state of Israel. That, 1948. Well, this was basically decided without any Palestinian input for those people. So these people's land was basically sold from under them without even them being consulted. So what exactly did Mahmoud Khalil say that was so horrifically terroristic and awful that he had to be kicked out of the country? Well, this is again him in his own words when he was interviewed in CNN and other interviews.
Are you guys going to listen to the university and leave the encampment here?
Of course not. The university is the one who should listen to us. They should listen to their student body, who are demanding to end their investment in the war that's happening in Palestine. Our demands are clear. Our demands are regarding the investment from the Israeli occupation, the companies that are profiting and contributing to the genocide of our people. Again, the university, once again, they are so stubborn in listening to their students. They're treating this matter as a disciplinary matter. They're not treating this as an anti-war movement that actually gathered thousands of students here. That actually sparked thousands of students across the United States.
How far are you all willing to go here on campus?
We're going to go as far as we need to pressure the university to pressure the university to divest from the occupation. This is up to the group, to the leadership of the group, to decide how far they will go. But now it's clear that the students will remain here. They will stay here until they achieve their demands.
So nothing about Hamas. Nothing about Hamas. And notice, whenever you see people on TV saying he supports Hamas, you won't find one statement from him supporting Hamas. Not a single one. Not a single one. Because if there was, they would have found it by now. Not a single statement he has ever said in support of Hamas. And even if he did support Hamas, still, in a free country, First Amendment rights apply to everybody, including immigrants. Including immigrants. People have a right to support who they want in a free society and say, if I want to say, I think Al-Qaeda is great, or I think the KKK is great. We've had, in the last administration, we had people who came from other countries like Jordan Peterson, who said that, racial terrorism wasn't an issue, or in the minds of some liberals was anti-trans. Right-wingers would have thrown a crap fit if Joe Biden said Jordan Peterson should be thrown out of America because he does not support trans ideology, and people feel threatened, trans people feel threatened by having him here, or black people feel threatened having him here. But even crazier is that even right-wing figures are coming to Mahmoud Khalil's defense. People like Ann Coulter. I don't know if you guys remember Ann Coulter. She questioned whether this was constitutional or not. Candace Owens, who has always been a Trump supporter, or at least in recent history has been a Trump supporter, she questioned the justification, highlighting First Amendment concern. Now, currently, U.S. District Judge Jesse Furman has temporarily halted Khalil's deportation, barring the government from removing him from the U.S. until at least a hearing that will be held. Now, during this procedural hearing, no major decisions were made about his release or transfer, so he will remain in detention as far as we know. Now, again, there is no proof that Mahmoud Khalil has said anything pro-Hamas. But you know who is pro-Hamas and has been pro-Hamas? Israel itself. Israel itself. Now, this is Ron Paul from 2009. One of our congressmen, Ron Paul, talking about the origins of Hamas.
You know, Hamas, if you look at the history, you'll find out that Hamas was encouraged and really started by Israel because they wanted Hamas to counteract Yasser Arafat. And you say, well, yeah, that was better then and served its purpose, but we didn't want Hamas to do this. So then we as Americans say, well, we have such a good system, we're going to impose this on the world. We're going to invade Iraq and teach people how to be Democrats. We want free elections. So we encourage the Palestinians to have a free election. They do, and they elect Hamas. So we first, indirectly and directly through Israel, help establish Hamas. Then we have election. Then Hamas becomes dominant, so we have to kill them. You know, it just doesn't make sense.
So that's, again, longtime Congressman Ron Paul talking about how the United States and Israel are responsible for Hamas being where it is. Mahmoud Khalil's not the one who put Hamas where it is. The U.S. government did, and Israel's government did. Up until very recently, Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, used to send suitcases of cash into the Gaza Strip to give to Hamas. And that's not me saying that. That's SHREDS saying that. That's Israel's biggest newspaper saying that. There are many people in Israel who are really ultra peed off at Netanyahu for his role in creating Hamas and maintaining Hamas as we speak. Now, the thing that's so crazy is that the Israeli media, and I've talked about this before on this show, the Israeli media is able to criticize their government more than we are in this country. The First Amendment applies to every other country in the world but Israel in this country. I can say I hate the French, I hate the Germans, I hate Canadians, I hate Russians. I can literally go on TV and say the humanizing thing about Russians. They're inherently evil, as you see on MSNBC and other channels on a regular basis. Oh, Vladimir Putin's the worst person in history. I can't say that about Netanyahu. I can say whatever I want about Mexicans, about Africans, about Guatemalans, about, Haitians, Kenyans. It doesn't matter. I can say whatever I want about any group of people except for Israelis. Now, why is that? Well, there is a sitting member of Congress as we speak, not Ron Paul this time, but a man named Thomas Massie, who is one of the few brave members of Congress. He is a Republican. I try not to hold that against him because sometimes he absolutely tells the truth about things. This is how he said that AIPAC, which is the America-Israel Political Committee, Political Action Committee, this is why we're not allowed to basically criticize Israel. Nobody is.
Openly in that they're showing you they're doing it, but opaquely in that you can't track it because they're not registered.
Is there any other Republican who has your views on this?
Well, I have Republicans who come to me on the floor and say, I wish I could vote with you today. Yours is the right vote, but I would just take too much flack back home. And I have Republicans who come to me and say, that's wrong what AIPAC is doing to you. Let me talk to my AIPAC person. By the way, everybody but me has an AIPAC person.
What does that mean, an AIPAC person?
It's like your babysitter, your AIPAC babysitter, who is always talking to you for AIPAC. They're probably a constituent in your district, but they are, firmly embedded in AIPAC. And
every member has something like this?
I don't know how it works on the Democrat side, but that's how it works on the Republican side. And when they come to D.C., you go have lunch with them, and they've got your cell number, and you have conversations with them. So I've had
that's absolutely crazy.
I've had 4 members of Congress say, "I'll talk to my AIPAC person," and it's literally what we call them, my AIPAC guy. I'll talk to my AIPAC guy and see if I can get him to, dial those ads back.
Why have I never heard this before?
It doesn't benefit anybody. Why would they want to tell their constituents that they've basically got a buddy system with somebody who's representing a foreign country? It doesn't benefit the congressman for people to know that, so they're not going to tell you that.
Have you seen any other country do anything like this? Like
no.
Russia obviously determines the outcome of our elections. We keep hearing that. Does anyone have a Putin guy that they talk to?
Not only do they not have a Putin guy, look, they don't have a Britain guy. They don't have an Australian guy. They don't have a Germany dude. It's the only country that does this, that has somebody that uniformly. I guarantee there's some spreadsheet at AIPAC where.
Yeah, so that's why you're not allowed to say anything bad about AIPAC in this country, because they give Elise Stefanik $1 million, Ted Cruz $2 million. They give Marco Rubio, who's the current Secretary of State, $1 million. They give Chuck Schumer, the Democrats' minority leader, they give him, the Democrats leader, they give him $2 million. They give Pete Buttigieg $200,000, Rick Scott $700,000, Dan Crenshaw hundreds of thousands of dollars, Tim Scott $400,000, Steny Hoyer $2 million, Hakeem Jeffries, who's the Democrats' leader, has gotten $2 million from AIPAC. This is why you're not allowed to criticize them in public. This is why this is the only issue in our society that you are not allowed to have this opinion about, and you might get deported if you're not an American citizen, or you might lose your job if you are an American citizen, or you might end up finding yourself in a whole world of trouble. This is why. And here's the crazy thing, right? Donald Trump, right? The government is trying to deport Mahmoud based on a rarely used provision of federal immigration law that allows the Secretary of State, who is Marco Rubio, who's gotten $2 million from AIPAC, $1 million from AIPAC, to remove individuals whose presence it believes has serious adverse foreign policy consequences for the United States. Now, here's the crazy thing. You want to hear some craziness? Listen to this. The only previous time it was used before was in 1995. 1995, according to recent press reports. According to the New York Times, that was an attempt to deport a former Mexican government official. And it was struck down as unconstitutional. Okay, that's not the craziness. That's not the craziest at all. The judge that struck it down as unconstitutional was Marianne Barry. Marianne Trump Barry. Donald Trump's sister. Yes, Donald Trump's sister was the judge in the 1995 case that found that this provision that they try to deport people under was unconstitutional. So if anybody would know that what they're trying to do to Mahmoud Khalil is unconstitutional, it would be the man whose sister literally struck it down as unconstitutional. And this is where we're at. The First Amendment does not matter when it comes to Israel. The Trump administration has warned some 60 colleges that they could lose federal money if they fail to make campuses safe for Jewish students. Like, show me all these Jewish students who are being beaten and killed. I'd like to see it. They can't. It's not happening. They're already pulling $400 million from Columbia University merely for allowing young people to do what they've been doing since the 60s, which is protesting. Now, again, imagine this shoe was on the other foot. Imagine if liberals were in office, the Democrats were in office, and they argued that anybody who's against climate change legislation or who is anti-DEI or anti-affirmative action are threats to society. Imagine if they made that argument and banned Jordan Peterson and banned the Tate brothers and banned all these right-winger influencers who come from all over the world to come to America for some reason, who are obsessed with our politics when their countries have their own problems. Imagine if right-wingers would throw a conniption fit. These people have spent the last 20 years arguing that there's no racism against black people in this country. In spite of the fact that every year when the hate crime statistics are released, we're the #1 victims of hate crimes. According to them, hate crimes don't exist unless it is hurting Jewish students' feelings. That's it. That's the only hate crime there is, hurting Jewish people's feelings. And so now, Thomas Massie, who you just heard, exposing Congress, all these Congress people for having AIPAC people who literally tell them what positions they can and cannot have on an issue. Now Donald Trump's embroiled in a feud with Thomas Massie, another Republican from Kentucky, and is threatening to primary him because he's telling the truth about this. Because he's not voting to give Israel more money and all these different things, more money that Donald Trump wants to give money to. He's threatening to primary him. So he doesn't even care about the people within his own party. The only thing he cares about is the money he's getting from people like Marian Adelson, who gave him $100 million. Of course, Elon Musk gave him a few $100 million as well. But AIPAC, who completely rules and dominates Donald Trump. And this is why our media is so useless, because they will talk to you all day about Russia. Putin. Oh, Vladimir Putin owns Trump. AIPAC owns Trump. AIPAC owns Trump, and you say nothing about it whatsoever. Let me get this caller. Thanks for waiting, caller. You waited almost 10 minutes. Thanks for waiting.
Well, I'm happy to hear your show. I mean, I'm glad to hear somebody out there sharing this stuff.
Well, thank you.
I don't think anybody really remembers, because most people don't watch C-SPAN, but when they invited, the GOP invited the Israeli prime minister to come and insult the president of the United States, President Obama. I mean, he must have spent, the same guy that's running Israel right now, must have spent 20 minutes talking bad about President Obama and how the Congress shouldn't listen to him.
Oh, yeah. I've talked about that before. Go on.
They've been promoting, if there is anybody that's the arrow of our war campaigns for the last 30 years, it's been Netanyahu. I mean, you tell me any war, any conflict. Look, Russia doesn't want to have a war. They're surrounded by the United Nations. That's the same thing as being the U.S.
Right.
They want a little buffer. Okay. The idea of having the Crimea allows them to have a navy. Right? Without the Crimea, they can't have a navy.
Right.
So, I mean, they're not pushing us to go to war. China essentially, look, these folks have gone back to some traditional stuff like the philosophies of the olden days. It's like Taoism and Confucianism. That's now part of accepted manners in Asia. We don't even we have chattel slavery in white people, and that's the superiority stuff, right? The same Anglos, the same English people use opium and heroin, basically heroin, to addict Chinese workers back when they got kicked out.
Exactly. But thank you for your call, bro. I got to get ready to go to a break, but thanks for calling. But yeah, he's absolutely right. I've talked about this, and I'm glad he brought that up. Netanyahu came to the United States when Obama was in office. Without telling Barack Obama he was coming to the United States. Got up in front of Congress, insulted Barack Obama, and Barack Obama did nothing about it. That's who Israel is. They own and control our government. They can come to the United States and insult our president, and our president can't do nothing about it. So, next time, again, you watch your corporate media and they're telling you about who the bad guys are, just remember who owns them and controls them and where they're getting their narratives from. All right, folks, when we get back, happy, nice shift again.